Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all having a great time. First of all, I would like to acknowledge and thank the organizers of TEDx for inviting me. It's a true honor to be here. These three powerful words describe my life in the trenches: woman, surgeon, and trauma. I have lived and I'm living each of these words and each of these identities. First, the world of trauma. But what is trauma? Trauma is a severe injury, and I use these words interchangeably. Perhaps when you think of trauma, your mind goes to a very bad car crash, or perhaps the shooting that happened on the Danforth this past summer. For sure, this is trauma. Other types of trauma could be injuries from cycling or falling off a ladder, or more minor car crashes. And these things happen in my world every day, all the time. And here's a fact that you may not know. Trauma is a disease. In fact, it is best understood as a disease. It has its own set of risk factors, predicted outcomes, scientists who study it, and doctors who treat it, like me. Second important fact, trauma is a preventable disease. The tragic fact is that major injury is a preventable public health crisis the world over. And it takes an enormous toll on its victims the world over. Because trauma is mostly a disease of young people. Trauma or injury is the #1 cause of potential years of life lost in people between the ages of 2 and 42. That is to say, if a person loses their lives between those two ages, 2 and 42, the most likely cause is that they suffered a terrible injury. According to the World Health Organization, 5 million people worldwide will die annually from trauma. And trauma accounts for 9% of the world's deaths, which is almost twice as many as the number of people who die from HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. Every day, more than 2,000 children lose their lives from an injury. That is a preventable trauma death. And for every death, there are many people who live on with lifelong disability. Trauma can become a chronic illness with innumerable visits to the emergency department and doctor's offices and rehospitalizations and more surgery and so on and so on. And to think all of this could have been prevented. Okay, a deeper dive into what trauma really is. The two most common types of trauma are blunt and penetrating. And in Canada, blunt injuries are more common. These are injuries that are sustained in a motor vehicle crash, or a motorcycle crash, or a bicycle crash. Now notice I did not say motorcycle accident. The truth is that in many instances, the crash was no accident. Trauma usually happens because of poor safety conditions, high-risk behaviors, or high-risk circumstances. And yes, there's such thing as freak accidents, aptly named freak accidents, because they are so freakishly rare, like being struck by lightning. But much more commonly, injuries can be prevented if we commit to safer vehicles, safer road design, and safer construction sites. And also if we change our own attitudes and our own behaviors by not driving a car or a boat or a motorbike when we're intoxicated, by wearing our seatbelts and obeying the traffic rules. So that's my first key message. So much trauma worldwide is preventable. The other type of trauma is penetrating trauma. And penetrating trauma happens when someone gets shot or stabbed. And these are terrible injuries too. Injury and death from guns happens more in countries where there are more guns. The research is clear. A greater societal tolerance for civilian gun ownership results in higher rates of gun deaths, both homicide and suicide. And while I am not an expert on guns, what I am an expert in is the terrible damage that is caused by bullets fired by guns and into people. These bullets serve as small metal missiles that tear apart tissues, tear apart organs and blood vessels. And in doing so, they tear apart the person and rob them of their lives and do unimaginable harm to families and to societies. Let us consider a mass shooting event like the event that happened on the Danforth in Toronto this past summer, or the mass shooting that happened in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh recently. We can feel that these are random events committed by deranged people, and therefore, to an extent, unavoidable. But this is simply not true. The idea that we cannot, at least in part, prevent deranged people from harming and killing others with guns is just plain wrong. We know the strength of a country's gun laws correlates with the incidence of mass shooting events in that country. And we know that the absence of guns from homes is the most reliable way to prevent gun deaths in children and adolescents. Adolescent suicide is strongly associated with the availability of guns. And we now understand that the adolescent brain is not fully mature, so that the combination of alcohol, other drugs, impulsivity, and guns can prove lethal. Teen suicide by gun is a preventable tragedy. And doctors are alarmed. We are all speaking out. Many doctors support a position that would limit guns in our society because we are alarmed by what we are witnessing on a daily basis, the shattered bodies, the shattered families, and the shattered lives. As Canadians, we have reason to feel good about our gun safety record. Or do we? Let's examine this a little more closely. It is true that compared to our US neighbors, our gun fatality rate in Canada is about 5 times less than in the US. But what many Canadians may not readily appreciate is that actually, when compared to the other nations of the world, our gun safety record is actually quite terrible. Our gun fatality rate is 8 times greater than in the UK, Australia, Japan, and the Netherlands. That's 2016 data. Countries with strict laws governing civilian gun ownership, like the countries I just mentioned, our peer nations, have lower rates of homicide and suicide by gun. It is far more effective to prevent harm and disease than to ignore the warning signs and treat these terrible things afterwards. An ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure. We need to recognize that gun violence is a contagion and should be treated as a public health crisis. Either we accept that our friends and neighbors can legally possess guns and sometimes people get harmed or maimed or killed, or we find this situation not to be acceptable. Imagine waking up in a country where we don't have to hear about gun violence. We need to decide, and we need to act, and we need to show up. Use your power to stamp out the scourge of gun violence. Write your MPP or sign the petition to ban handguns and assault weapons in Canada. Okay, now, switching gears. Another very powerful word, the word surgeon. What is my world like as a surgeon in the big city? I can tell you my days are long, and time always seems to be short. But it is a rare privilege to be a surgeon and to be a trauma surgeon. In fact, it's a rare privilege to be a doctor. Surgeons play an intimate role in the lives of their patients and their families. Thankfully, most people will never need a surgeon, and very few people will ever need a trauma surgeon. But when someone needs their surgeon, they really need their surgeon. When a patient agrees to undergo surgery, either scheduled at a later date or emergently, as in right now, from that moment on, that patient and their surgeon share a special bond. That person has said, I trust you with my life. I trust you to do the right thing, and not to skip any steps, and not to miss anything, and to show up with your A game. And if something goes wrong, I trust that you can fix it. That patient has said, yes, open me up and fix that thing that ails me. We can hold life and death in our hands. It is heavy and serious and weirdly uplifting. When a surgeon becomes involved in the care of a patient, and especially in the emergency setting like the patients that I treat, people are very vulnerable. And whether I'm planning an operation for appendicitis or severe trauma, or whether my patient and I have recently discussed a cancer diagnosis, together we embark on an intimate and powerful journey. I have been asked many times why I chose to become a trauma surgeon. I chose this career because I felt that if I worked very hard and had compassion for my patients and passion for my work, that as a surgeon, I could have the ability to save a life that might otherwise have been lost. And every once in a while, I get to be in that room when someone's life is being saved. And I can tell you, that is a thrill like no other. It makes it all worth it. It is an awesome experience to be woven so intimately into the web of a person's life, to be present in those moments that matter the most, and to help my patients find life again. It is mysterious and awesome and miraculous. Being a surgeon is a chance to cure. Being a surgeon is a chance to care. Being a surgeon is grace in the face of adversity. It's about grit and determination to do whatever it takes to save that life. And I make the decision to show up for my patients every single day. Physicians, and especially surgeons, experience things that are well outside the realm of normal human experience. Physicians are there when life begins outside the womb, and we are there often when life ends on this earth. In my world, sometimes things don't turn out so well, operating on patients who require emergency surgery for trauma. Sometimes I must deliver the terrible news that a loved one has suffered a horrible trauma and could not be saved. Just a few hours earlier, that person was strong and vibrant and full of hopes and dreams, but a catastrophe befell them, and their life ended too soon in the operating room. And it breaks my heart every single time. I have come to respect the strength of life and the fragility of life. It is a sobering observation that all of us, everyone in this room, we are all only a few strokes of bad luck away from death. I have witnessed the sheer will of the human spirit and seen people overcome incalculable odds to survive terrible, terrible things. I am so often struck by the power of life and at the same time its fragility, the fleeting and irreplaceable nature of each person's personhood. I have held a person's heart in my hands. I have felt it beat its very last beats on earth, and I've watched as someone's life slips away until we can no longer measure it or feel it or find it. And I will never get used to it. It never gets easier. Health, or perhaps more aptly stated, illness. Illness is the great equalizer. We know that having access to health care, both preventative and therapeutic, impacts the health of whole populations. However, on an individual level, once that person has a disease, trauma, or cancer, all of us are a little bit in the same boat. That is to say, if a patient has cancer, those cancer cells don't care if you're a CEO or a school teacher or a homeless person. Those cancer cells are trying to eat you alive. And when I operate on patients, it is so remarkable to me that everyone looks the same on the inside. Except for the diseased organs, everyone's muscles look the same, everyone's bones look the same, and whether I'm holding the heart of a 25-year-old graduate student or a 25-year-old homeless person, I can tell you it feels the same. The differences between us are far greater on the outside. Hair color, height, weight, skin tone, but under the surgical drapes and on the inside, we all look the same. And herein lies my second key message today. Everyone is the same color on the inside. Okay, finally, switching gears one last time. My last and most important word, the strongest of the three words, woman. Hallelujah. Today, I want to talk about the power of women being heard, the power of women showing up. No doubt we live in troubled times, and when I look around the world, we have much to be concerned about. War, poverty, gun violence. But We also live in special and exciting times for women. It is true that worldwide, women still suffer terrible atrocities. Atrocities like child marriage, genital mutilation, rape as a tool of war. Women continue to be systematically excluded from education and are economically dependent in patriarchal societies. And in some societies, women just have no voice. This is all true. It happens. It happens too much. But it is also true that never before in human history have so many women had so much influence on our laws and our culture and our norms and the ways in which our families and our societies function. Women all over the globe are being heard and fighting back, and especially and importantly when it comes to sexual manipulation. I believe we live in a rare time and a special time. Let me give you a mundane example. 60 years ago, a typical home would have a large, gracious living room, or parlor as it was called. There, the men would retire after the evening meal to discuss politics and business and money. And in the same home, there was a small, cramped room at the back of the house, the kitchen. And there in the kitchen, women would do what was thought of as women's work, laundry, cooking, household chores. And of course, of the two rooms, the more beautiful and expensive room was the living room, where the men resided. Now, in the modern home, and increasingly all over the world, we all know that the kitchen is the heart of the home, where the family gathers, and where the business of the family is conducted, and everyone has a voice. In the modern home, the kitchen is often the most expensive room and the most well-appointed room in the whole house. This simple change in the size and use of rooms, room culture, if you will, reflects a current change in the power dynamics between men and women. This change has happened because women have become the engineers and have become the architects that design and build our homes. And this change has happened because today, more than ever before, more women than ever before have choices. The choice to be independent and financially independent, and the choice to be exactly who we want to be. Have you ever noticed how many things are so much more ergonomically designed than before? Your shoes, your clothes, furniture, cars, washing machines. And why? I believe this phenomenon is related to the influence that women have on the design and construction of everything around us. And also because women have the economic power to buy what they choose and reject what they do not choose. Women have arrived. This slide is the cover of the New Yorker magazine from April 2017, and it makes the point that your surgeon could well be a woman. This is emblematic of our time. I am what a woman looks like. I am what a surgeon looks like in 2018. And I believe that women, together with men, will unleash the good of humanity and for humanity. Certainly, humanity is aching for women to be our best. But this task is not for the faint of heart, and it will not be easy. Achieving true justice and equity for women will be difficult. There are many who will fight to preserve the way things are, and they will fight to keep the status quo because it advantages them. Why would they want things to change? Let's face it, many structures and many processes in our society have been designed by men, for men, and derived from a time when the gender roles were much more traditional than they are today. Here's an example from my world, the world of academic medicine. In academic medicine, the way that a doctor gets promoted to be a professor is to show that their work has national and international impact. Doctors publish their research in medical journals and travel to speak at academic conferences to garner this reputation. And this requirement means there's a lot of travel and a time away from home. While women, as brilliant doctors and researchers as they may be, often make the choice to travel less for work. Men find it easier to travel for their academic careers and hence are promoted more rapidly into leadership roles, perpetuating the power that men have in our society. Madeleine Albright, former US Secretary of State, once said, "There's plenty of room in the world for mediocre men, but there's no room in the world for mediocre women. You have to work. You have to work exceptionally hard, and you have to know what you're talking about," she said when speaking about herself. There's a lot of wisdom in that statement. It is still true that women have to work harder and be better to achieve the same success and the same status and money as men do. An example from my world, the world of surgery. Research shows that if a woman surgeon has a surgical complication, that surgeon's referrals tend to dry up. Whereas if a man surgeon has the same complication, there seems to be no change in referral patterns. Referring doctors tend to assume that in the case of the man, it was a one-off, an isolated incident. And it seems what they presume in the case of the woman surgeon is that the complication was a result of her being less committed or less competent as a surgeon. Women have to prove themselves over and over again. Women need to be consistently excellent. In the case of men, once they arrive and once they achieve a certain status, the assumption is that they're worthy of their status. Some men can get away with a lot of mediocrity and bad behavior. It seems that we are living in a world in which half the world is slipping back and the other half of the world is fighting to lurch forward. There are people who want to build walls and think only of themselves. But these people don't understand what the great Renaissance thinker and scientist Leonardo da Vinci said. He said, "Learn to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. We are all interconnected, and this is the inescapable truth. Toxic greenhouse gases spewed from factories warm the oceans and cause terrible hurricanes thousands of miles away. But women have arrived, and we are committed to improving our world. We will not ignore the destructive effects of climate change, and we are committed to creating a more equitable society. Martin Luther King said, "The long arc of history bends towards justice." And things are changing. In fact, things have already changed, and quite dramatically. Just this month in the US, and I'm not holding the United States out as a beacon of progressiveness nor enlightenment, it for sure is a complicated place, for sure. But the fact still remains that in the US 2018 midterm elections this month, the electorate voted a record 105 women to the Congressional House of Representatives. This body is comprised, let's clap for that, I think it's really important. Record. This body is comprised of 435 seats. This is a historic, perhaps I should say her-storic, increase in the number of women in Congress. In the world of medicine, too, women have come a long way. Just over half of the University of Toronto med school class is women. Amazing. However, women still remain underrepresented in the world of surgery, and we still remain underrepresented in leadership roles, like professors and deans and heads of departments. But in my age, and at this great time, and in this great country, Canada, in which we all live, I was able to achieve the things that I dreamt of, and some things I never dreamt of, like being on this stage in front of you today. I am a woman, I am a mother, I am a trauma surgeon. This was virtually unheard of only a generation ago. And although I fought my battles and encountered unenlightened men along the way, I must acknowledge that I had many male mentors and many male surgeons who trained me, and for the most part, I encountered men who believed in me and supported me and wanted me to be the best surgeon that I could be. And still today, I have many, many male mentors, lots of women mentors too. And during the long journey to be who I am, I had lots of help and lots of inspiration. My family is my first inspiration and undying source of help and support. And now this inspiration comes from my daughter, who too is growing up to be a brave and beautiful woman. Being a trauma surgeon is exciting and frightening and challenging and gratifying. and mostly it's very humbling. But I cannot think of anything else I'd rather do. As women together, we have the power to create a better world. As citizens together, we have the power to create effective laws. And as human beings together, we have the power to make change. But before any of this can happen, we have to show up. We have to make the decision to take risks and to be brave. Together, we can. Thank you.